back in. We are on to week 15, which means the fantasy playoffs are here. Congratulations, you've made it. But like Kobe said, job's not finished. So today we're here to talk about our top streaming options at both fantasy defense and kickers. Let's go ahead and get to it. We're going to start with our top defenses of the week. It's surprise, surprise to nobody. We're going to talk about the Seattle Seahawks first, as they've been phenomenal all year. They're currently the only defense averaging double-digit fantasy points per game. They are also fourth in sacks, fifth in turnovers, and have the most touchdowns as well. They have outscored the next closest defense by nearly 30 fantasy points. Now they head home to take on a Colts offense that is down to their third string rookie quarterback and Riley Leonard. Things have gotten so bad that there are reports today that Phillip Rivers is coming in for a tryout to see what he's still got left. The Seahawks are going to be my top defense of the week. Let's keep moving. Move over to the Eagles. The Eagles defense has struggled at times this season, but still averages 6.5 fantasy points per game, which is tied for 12th best. The Eagles also have the 15th most sacks and rank 23rd in turnovers. One thing that should help this defense is getting a matchup against the Raiders. The Raiders offense has been anemic this season. Geno Smith has arguably been the worst quarterback in the league. Their offensive line is a disaster, and this has led to them allowing the second most fantasy points to opposing defenses. We're firing up the Eagles this week. Lastly, let's talk about the Houston Texans. Just behind the Seahawks this year is the Houston Texans. They're averaging 9.7 fantasy points per game. They have one of the best pass rushing duos in Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter. They also boast one of the best secondaries with Derek Stingley, Kwame Lassiter, Jalen Petrie. Now they head home to take on a Cardinals team that allows the sixth most fantasy points to opposing defenses. Now, move over to our top streaming options, and we're going to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars have been one of the best fantasy defenses since their Week 8 bye. Over that span, the Jaguars have racked up the sixth most sacks, the ninth most interceptions, and they're averaging 9.5 fantasy points per game, which ranks third best. Now the Jaguars will get a home matchup against the Jets, who will likely be starting rookie quarterback Brady Cook. Cook took over for Tyrod Taylor early in the first half against the Dolphins. He completed just 46% of his passes. He ended up throwing for 163 yards and turned the ball over twice. He also was sacked 6 times in that game. On the season, the Jets have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to opposing defenses. And if Cook is the starter again, the Jags defense should feast, making them an easy top 5 defense for Week 15. Move over to the San Francisco 49ers. I'll be the first to admit the 49ers defense is not one we typically talk about when it comes to quality fantasy defenses this year. A lot of that is because of all the injuries they've taken. But the 49ers are the DST 24, averaging 5 fantasy points per game. They rank near the bottom of the league in both sacks and turnovers. So why would we even consider playing the 49ers defense in the fantasy playoffs? First off, they get a matchup against the Titans, who currently have an implied team total of just 15.5 points. They've also allowed the third most fantasy points to opposing defenses. Lastly, the 49ers, they've actually showed some signs of life recently, as they've now compiled 3 straight weeks of top 12 finishes. They will look to keep that streak alive, though, against one of the best matchups on the season. Next up, let's talk about the Chicago Bears. The Bears defense has been hit hard for most of the year with injuries, but they are still somehow the DST 13, averaging 6.6 fantasy points per game. Now we are starting to see this defense get a little bit more healthier. In recent weeks, they have got back stud corner Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon, linebackers TJ Edwards, and Noah Sewell. The Bears already lead the league in turnovers and now take on a rookie quarterback who has thrown 3 picks in his first 4 games and has also been sacked 8 times. He's also struggled completing the ball with just a 52% completion percentage. Overall, the Browns allow the 4th most fantasy points to opposing defenses. I think the Bears are a top 10 defense this week. Let's keep moving here. Let's move over to kickers. First, we're going to hit on is Evan McPherson, rostered in 48% of leagues. Evan McPherson had been one of the hottest kickers in the league prior to the Week 14 game against the Bills. In Week 14, though, McPherson did attempt a field goal, which was actually the first time all season. He did convert all 4 of his PATs. Despite only scoring 4 fantasy points, McPherson is still the kicker 3, averaging 12 fantasy points per game since Week 10. Next up for McPherson is a juicy matchup against the Ravens, who allow 10.7 fantasy points per game, which is the second highest rate. McPherson is in line to be a top 5 kicker option again in Week 15. Let's keep moving here. Let's move over to Andy Borregales. Much like Evan McPherson, Borregales has been on fire the last month of the season. He's averaged 14.3 fantasy points per game, which trails only Jason Myers over that span. And he has connected on 83% of his field goals and has connected on 4 field goals of 40-plus yards, which ranks second among kickers over that span. On the season, Borregales is the kicker 12 in fantasy points per game and the kicker 8 overall. Now heading into Week 15, the Patriots have a huge matchup against the Bills. This game has the 3rd highest total on the slate, and the Patriots have a healthy 24.5-point team total. Borregales is one of the best streaming options available right now. Next up is going to be Harrison Mevis. Since taking over as the Rams kicker, Mevis has converted 100% of his field goals and PATs, However, he's only attempted 3 field goals, which is why he scored just 7 fantasy points per game. Last week against the Cardinals, he converted all 6 of his PATs and his only field goal attempt for 9 fantasy points. He finishes the kicker 9, and he now has top 10 performances in 2 of his last 3 weeks. Next up for the Rams, a home matchup against the Lions. This game has a very strong 52.5-point total, and the Rams sport a 28.5-point total, which is the second highest on the slate. The thicker kicker has a solid floor, but in a game like this, I think he also has a pretty high ceiling as well. Now, a couple other options I wanted to hit on as well, some bonus options here. First is going to be Riley Patterson. We spoke about him last week, and once again, he's in play this week. Since week 9, Patterson has averaged 10.6 fantasy points per game, which ranks 5th highest. He's converted 92% of his field goals. A big part of that has been he's converted 7 field goals of 40 or 50 plus yards, which actually is first among all kickers. This week, the Dolphins take on a Steelers team that allows the 6th most fantasy points to kickers. Patterson is still only rostered in 5% of leagues, despite scoring double-digit fantasy points in 3 straight weeks, and has scored 7 or more fantasy points in 6 straight. Patterson should be rostered in far more leagues and is a top 12 kicker option for Week 15. Lastly is going to be Eddy Pineiro. Pineiro is expected to return in Week 15 after missing 2 games with a hamstring injury. Previous to the injury, Pineiro was putting together a great fantasy season, averaging 10 fantasy points per game. He returns to a great matchup against the Titans, who allow the 11th most fantasy points to kickers. Pineiro is only rostered in 8% of league. It should be a top 12 kicker option rest of season. So that being said, if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section below. Let's get that win this week so we can keep it moving to the next round of the fantasy playoffs. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.